The article Functional Assessment of Distracting and Disruptive Behaviors in the School Setting broke down the FBA system into 4 different parts or phases. Phase 1 is said to be data collection. Phase 2, data implementation and hypotheses. Phase 3, verification, and Phase 4, treatment implementation. I believe that the FBA is a very valuable tool that could be used in all types of school settings to find out the different behaviors and interventions that could help students decrease those problem behaviors seen in the classroom setting. In phase 1, either the teacher, the implementer, the consultant would be conducting data collection. That data collection can range anywhere from reviewing records, rating skills, interviews, and that could be interviews of the teacher, the gen ed teacher, any support staff, or paraprofessionals that work with the student on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or know the student really well. Other observations would be the direct observations with the ABC data, which breaks down the behavior into antecedent behavior and consequence. Antecedent being what happens prior to the behavior obviously being the behavior being exhibited, and the consequence being what happened right after the behavior. There's more observational data such as the narrative data, basically writing out everything that has happened in the classroom, how students reacted, how teachers reacted, and what the student did next. More direct data collection would be event recording, time sampling, and then looking at the environmental factors as well as the class activity to determine what could be the function behind the behavior, to get a better sample and explanation as to why the behavior might be occurring. After phase 1, we move into phase 2, which is data interpretation and hypotheses. This is where we looked into our ABC data and our other data charts, and we try to come up with a hypotheses as to why the behavior might be occurring, which then leads us to phase 3, which is verification. Within the verification stage, this is where we design conditions in order to test our hypotheses. So for example, we have a student that is constantly screaming in our classroom, and our hypothesis is that the student screams in order to gain the teacher's attention. We will test that hypothesis by having the teacher give the student attention every couple of minutes or intervals and seeing if the behavior decreases. If the behavior does not, then we know that our hypothesis is then incorrect, and maybe the student is screaming in order to gain other attention of maybe gaining peer attention, or maybe they're avoiding the task, and we have to go back, look at our data, and make a different hypothesis. But if our hypothesis was correct, that the behavior of screaming decreased, we can then move on to phase 4, which is the treatment implementation. This is where we implement different types of interventions to help the student decrease the behavior, in this case being screaming. So maybe the intervention is a card, or the student receives positive reinforcement from the teacher in order to decrease screaming. I believe that in any setting, the FBA process is just so valuable just because it can be implemented in all types of settings. It can be implemented in a regular ed classroom. It can be implemented on a special education student who is included in a gen ed classroom. It can be implemented in a self-contained classroom. There's just so many settings that the FBA can help and benefit teachers and educators, basically identifying what is a target behavior and how are we going to decrease this behavior by basically analyzing it, taking data, and being very specific instead of guessing or trying to come up with kind of temporary fixes that maybe might not last. The FBA instead lets us get a really deep look into the behavior and lets the intervention be very individualized and personalized for that student.